even, going back to the chronic Lyme talk we discussed, I think that, while certainly I ascribe to the idea, as you talked about, that 2 weeks of doxy or 3 weeks of doxy is often not enough, especially if someone's had this infection for, more than 6 months, say. But endless antibiotics isn't the answer either. There needs to be a point at which you say, okay, if you can't get off antibiotics because you just continue to have symptoms, then we got to lower the threshold at which your immune system's reacting, because it's unlikely this organism is causing tissue damage anymore. And it's more likely that your own immune system is responsible for the damage and the inflammation that's coming, and really restoring immune, regulation and get rid of some of these toxins. And that's part of it. And it's a process for sure.
Welcome to the Peptides and Longevity podcast. Each week, we'll dive into groundbreaking science, innovative therapies, and the future of health and longevity. Alongside visionary physicians and experts, we'll explore how peptides, cutting-edge medicine, and lifestyle strategies can redefine the way we age. Get ready to transform your health, optimize your vitality, and unlock the secrets to a longer, healthier life. Let's get started.
Hello, it's Dr. Kent Holtorf with another episode. Today we're going to be speaking with Dr. Cory Tichauer, and we're talking about biotoxin illness and basically peptide use of biotoxin illness. A little bit about Dr. Cory. He grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, so a farm-raised boy. As early as you remember, he wanted to be a physician, which is interesting, is rare, it seems, these days. He graduated with honors from Cornell University with a BA in neurobiology and behavior. He earned his doctorate in medicine at the National College of Naturopathic Medicine. He's the owner and lead physician at Bear Creek Naturopathic Clinic in Medford, Oregon. I believe that the body has within itself the inherent ability to heal. Dr. Cory utilizes an integrative therapeutic model designed to remove obstacles to health, simultaneously optimizing the self-healing mechanism of the body. Healing is accomplished through the rational and sequential elimination of infections and toxicity from the body, while helping to normalize immune dysfunction, mitochondrial energy production, and cellular detoxification and repair, and really looking at the whole system. And, and it's the one thing that I think standard medicine is just missing, And so I consider him a great friend. In fact, we're talking forever before we interviewed here, and he's just always on the cutting edge, treats everything, the sick of the sick, and just loves a challenge. And it's just so knowledgeable. I know you're gonna love this interview. He focuses on functional medicine approach within the realm of chronic infectious illness, neurodegenerative diseases, and autoimmune disease for the past 15 years. He looks a little young. I'm going to question him on that. With emphasis on tick-borne illness, such as Lyme disease. He's a member of the International Lyme and such diseases, ILADS. He's been a member of the International Lyme and Associated Disease Society since 2009, when he received a prestigious fellowship to receive formal training and treatment for Lyme. He also was an active member of the International Society for Environmental Acquired Illness. And so that's what we're going to talk a lot about today. He is well-versed in treatment of mold illness and CIRS, so chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And all these things are connected, and they're so multi-system, and it's so difficult. I think of what standard doctor would even look at that stuff, but it's just, and I see him at all the conferences, and he's just passionate. I love it, and just wants to do the best for his patients, and always investigating new treatments. He's always striving to improve outcomes and provide the best possible care. And he's really successful in the patients that have been everywhere. And lucky you, I know that goes, you get the patients that have been everywhere, and he's just doing such a great service and getting great results. So here are a lot of great things about him as well. Again, we talked about so much beforehand, and so many things are changing in medicine, and some things for good, some not for good. But I think, all these sickest patients are getting left behind, and if a doctor doesn't know what it is, it doesn't exist, or it's a patient's fault. But usually just tell me a little bit. I didn't even hello. How are you? Welcome. I didn't even give you a chance here. Thanks for being on. And you're up in Oregon, and I see the news of crazy stuff going on up there. But again, thank you for taking the time. I know you're a busy guy.
Hey, yeah, you're welcome, Kat. Yeah, we just got through the fires down here in Southern Oregon, but we're looking good moving into the fall here. And I wanted to say thanks to you too on this topic, because my knowledge and my passion for learning more about peptides really started from you as being the cutting edge on this topic yourself. I think that was maybe 5 years ago at iLabs when you first presented on peptide therapy as a unique option that I'd never heard of. And and I don't know if you remember, but I think it was me like just pestering you for months after that and emailing you nonstop. And
Who is this guy?
You gotta learn more about this. Yeah, and I didn't leave Ken alone. And here we are 5 years later, and peptides have been a huge part of my practice and improving outcomes and restoring physiology and neuroendocrine function and getting all these chronic people who are suffering with this multitude of chronic functional illnesses, fatigue and brain fog and pain and all these things that really the standard medical model doesn't have answers for. Peptides have been a huge component of the successes we've seen in restoring people's health.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I give lectures on it, and people just go, I can't believe there's all these studies. Why haven't I heard about it? And well, because there's no drug rep,
right?
Selling this stuff. And it's changed my practice, and I know it's changed your practice for everyone from healthy people. I think it's the best, anti-aging, longevity, ability to stay healthy. Like you look at epitaph, increasing telomere length, to the sickest of the sick. And it's been those things that people have tried IV antibiotics for years, and then, it's like, and you specialize in some of the toughest things like biotoxin illness and, what the heck do you do? And it's mentioned in my own story, my girlfriend just recently, I feel I'm good. I don't know if you ever get rid of Lyme. I think it's kind of like, virus but it's, if you keep your immune system up and all that's fine. But she's developed basically dermatographia out of the blue. And so we had a mold guy come around. We couldn't find any mold, but coming underneath the bathtub, there was mold toxins.
Yeah.
And right in the bedroom, you know? And so it's major. And let me ask you just one question though. Do you find, because my thought, if someone gets Lyme, right, they're probably, even if they're not treated well, they get 2 weeks of doxy, which studies show they relapse like 3 or 4 months later, 80% of the time.
Yep.
But if you have like nothing else, they're not going to be terrible. It's like when all of a sudden they seem to be more sensitive to molds, like they'll be everyone in the house. And this is what I hear even from my friends, and we got, like all our staff there are like Lyme patients, biotoxin patients. EMFs are seen to be causing a problem and cause actually mold to grow. And, especially the husband goes, that's crazy, but the people that have the Lyme or another infection are much more sensitive now to the biotoxin. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So much to say about that topic. Definitely in these chronic infectious models, there's often a trigger that seems to precipitate the immune dysfunction and either the growth of the organism that previously may have been managed by the immune system, or accentuates the immune inflammatory response to the presence of a latent organism that may not have actually been causing tissue damage in the first place. And I think Lyme is still something we really don't understand. As you talked about, can we ever really get rid of it? It's one of these intracellular infections that it's doubtful that we really can. And then you start talking about potentials for sexual transmission or in utero transmission.
I think in utero is the biggest problem. I mean, I know that's where I got it. I look back, one pupil was bigger, but like, one side of my body flushing, my left arm would stop working, and I think that's just the biggest transmission rate. But anyways, I decided to comment on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it absolutely. And, if you start looking at just like PCR, like urinary PCR analysis, like I know at least one lab's reporting almost 94% positives in cases that were sent to them, which obviously presents itself as an issue in of itself. And then if you want to diagnose everyone with Lyme, great, but that's probably not accurate. It probably represents that there's carriage stages of Lyme, and there's a lot of people who have small amounts of it in their body and have been exposed to it. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have an infection, but it's one of these.
Plus, you're sending people who you think have symptoms,
Yeah. So, I mean, biotoxin illness itself is a term that I think is so associated with mold. Dr. Shoemaker really popularized that, and a lot of what he wrote about is really brilliant, actually. But biotoxin illness is just this topic that incorporates everything that's exogenous from molds and solvents and heavy metals and anything that your body can create an immune inflammatory response to endogenous things that live in our bodies. We're carriers for a number of things. There's pathogenic organisms that are present, like that we can't get rid of, Lyme and chlamydia, Coxiella, and Brucella, and all these intracellular infections. And then there's the question about opportunists. We talk about Pseudomonas or Klebsiella, Proteus, even strep, that if it's in the wrong place or if it grows too much, we also can see an immune inflammatory response to that. And that question brings up, well, endotoxins and lipopolysaccharide and antigenic debris in general that generates these chronic immune inflammatory responses. And how do you restore immune regulation, I think is the big question in this. And even, going back to the chronic Lyme talk we discussed, I think that, while certainly I ascribe to the idea, as you talked about, that 2 weeks of doxy or 3 weeks of doxy is often not enough, especially if someone's had this infection for, more than 6 months, say. But endless antibiotics isn't the answer either. There needs to be a point at which you say, okay, if you can't get off antibiotics because you just continue to have symptoms, then we got to lower the threshold at which your immune system's reacting, because it's unlikely this organism is causing tissue damage anymore. And it's more likely that your own immune system is responsible for the damage and the inflammation that's coming, and really restoring immune, regulation and get rid of some of these toxins and that's part of it, and it's a process for sure.
All right, so you're diving deep into peptides and longevity on this podcast, and we're right there with you. Integrative Peptides stands out, trusted by over 10,000 doctors to deliver real results for their patients. These premium peptides are your key to unlocking vitality, recovery, and a longer, stronger life. Visit integrativepeptides.com and use the code PODLIFE for 10% off your first order. Again, integrativepeptides.com. Use the code PODLIFE for 10% off. It's time to elevate your journey, starting now.
Yeah, I think we're just bombarded with so many things, and so many things we can't even test for, but, glyphosate, why is that even on the market still? PCBs, it's kind of ironic. I went to an environmental conference and stuck out, went and had lunch, and sitting there, I was open up USA Today, and on the intersection was a cover page, was a killer whale died, I found on the ice, and they did a blubber analysis, and it had 1,000-fold the lethal levels of PCBs, which was banned, 50, 60 years ago, And then I think also emotional stress is just wipes out your immune system. We used to think it lowers it, but it really modulates it, so you can't fight the infection, but you get tons of inflammation. With all now, it's like, before, I mean, we've grown up, it's like, oh, we'll send a letter, we'll wait a week, get it back. And now it's like everything's instantaneous. We're on our phones, like, we got traffic. It's like all just so many different, like even in California, the regulations for fire retardants are so much higher, and everyone's just full of this toxic stuff, even more in California. I mean, there's so many things, and it's just, I think it's killing us, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's all getting into the groundwater. It's going up into this, it's part of the whole water table, and getting into the, in the rain. I think, they found glyphosate in the Saharan desert. There's no place it isn't. And, just incidents of chronic illness and incidents of cancer, like these are things that have been increasing over the last 40 to 60 years. And I don't think it's a coincidence that that same time period represents the highest increase in, our belief that, better living through chemistry, right? That we can add more chemicals, we can manage agriculture, we can, manage our forests, we can manage our food, we can do all this stuff. And yeah, maybe in the short term it helps, but in the long term, these, biotoxins by definition is, I don't know by definition, but the primary problems they represent is that they are fat soluble. So, so these things end up depositing into areas of our body where we don't easily excrete it. And so they affect things like our endocrine function, pretty, proportionally neuroendocrine system, our hypothalamus, our pituitary gland, and then just cell membranes. People don't realize, they think, oh, it's, in our fatty tissue, and it doesn't mean it's in your butt. It means that it's like it's sticking into the cell membranes, it's in the mitochondrial membranes, and it causes, these long chain fatty acids, these odd chain fat acids that really it's like cell scarring, right? And these are things that impair membrane fluidity, the ability to exchange nutrients and waste, protein binding, second messenger molecules, fluid balance, peroxisome function. And ultimately you get this auto intoxication as cells enter this cell danger cycle, right? As we've all heard about, which creates this senescence where the cell just kind of stops really operating.
We talked about it, but can you give your little short definition of the cell danger response? Like how mitochondria?
Yeah, and I'm not going to profess to be an expert on Robert Navio's work, but the way that I see the cell danger response is that when you have an intracellular toxicant, whether that's an environmental toxin, something exogenous, or whether that's like the presence of an intracellular infection like Lyme or something else, that our bodies aren't able to clear, right? So we have certain immune cells that are dedicated to this. We have peroxisomes that are supposed to push this stuff out. We have, subsets of our natural killer cells, like our CD57 sets, that are designed to try and address this. But when the toxicity or the infections kind of reach these critical thresholds that the immune system can't manage it anymore, in order to prevent further damage to the body and the cell, you get senescence. You basically get a phenomena where the cell goes to protect itself. And so in so doing, you stop seeing recycling, this autophagy, I guess, is the opposite of cell danger response. You stop recycling mitochondria, you stop your ATP, and your Krebs cycle slows down. You start to see lactate increasing instead of pyruvate. You see, all these phenomena associated with impaired mitochondrial function, impaired cellular function. You see increases in toxicity. You see, cytokines that go up, and really all of this is self-preservation, is the way I think of it.
I think, I agree. Everything's a vicious cycle, you know, and it's like you don't have enough cellular energy to kick the stuff out of the, like heavy metals. You need energy to get it out of the cell. If you don't, it's stuck. I don't care how much chelation you do, it's, it's stuck in there.
Yeah.
There's just so many things like that. It's either, you're getting healthier or you're getting worse. And I don't know, you may see the same. I think it's like, I can't go to a party where someone comes up and either they're so sick or their family member or their friend, and I know you didn't see that 10 years ago, 20 years ago,
No, and it's an interesting phenomenon. I think a lot of people ask the question of like, like what you're saying, you see this person at the party, you're talking to a friend, and he talks about an acquaintance or his wife or someone, like, oh, why is she so sick? And, the question's always like, well, we live together, or, we're exposed to the same thing. Why is this person sick and why am I not? And, we already covered these sort of direct effects of biotoxins, how they impair, our membranes and our cellular function. But the indirect effect, which is really what SIRS is all about, that chronic inflammatory response syndrome, basically says that about, call it 20 to 30% of the population lacks what's known as these HLA receptors that are needed to recognize toxins as they're presented from dendritic cells that are normally bound to these major histocompatibility complexes. So, when you can't generate an adaptive immune response because you can't create CD4 antigen-specific T cells, you start driving a chronic innate immune inflammatory response, and you start to see cytokines going through the roof. You start to see, impacts as the toxins end up binding into, the hypothalamus and the leptin receptors. And so then you see this whole cascade that happens where melanocyte stimulating hormone drops off, and then you see a cascade of vasoactive intestinal peptide levels dropping down, and then the pineal gets affected. And of course, we all love epithalin, which is personally I do as well. And so you see this huge array, and as you look at the biotoxin pathway, you go, well, why is it I have GI symptoms? Why is it I have pain? Why is it that I'm cold all the time? Why is it I'm, achy? Why did my libido drop off? Why am I peeing all the time? And it's because these upstream neuroendocrine hormones kind of direct a lot of these things. And when you shut off the spigot up here, you're not going to water any of the plants down here.
Controller, and it just, and even like, mast cell is such a huge thing. And, I know you're on the mast cell mastermind group, and they seem stuck on directly affect the mast cells. And I'm like, look upstream, and it's funny in little things. I ask patients, do you, drink like a fish and pee like a racehorse? They're like, what? Yeah, and it's interesting. And so many things, I've been doing some deep dive, on some of these bioregulator peptides, and like inflammation of the hypothalamus just causes so many issues, and it just affects everything. And yeah, so when you have a biotoxin illness, you're like, I guess the standard, is the mold everyone thinks of, but really it's everything, right?
Yeah, that's just it. It's as you just brought up with mast cell activation, and why is this happening? And sure, we know ways to manage that with stabilizing the histamine response, but the question is like, what's driving it? And so that process of discovery of trying to understand what it is I think the first step in this. And there's definitely different ways that you can assess or diagnose someone with biotoxin related illness. The visual contrast sensitivity test, I think, is still, very helpful. You can do it online at vcstest.com for free, or you can buy the.
You want to mention more? Why does that work? What is it?
Yeah, so I think it was developed by the Air Force, if I remember right, somewhere in like the 60s or 70s, to find out when pilots had been exposed to excessive amounts of jet fuel, which is of course a solvent, and it would impair their bodies, their central nervous system's ability to work. So the visual contrast test it's looking at your brain's ability to distinguish contrast. So really it's like these gray circles with gray lines that are hatched one way or the other or are vertical. And you put yourself a fixed distance away from the card or the screen, and you're looking to see which way those lines are going, these gray lines on a gray background. And what they've found is there's a strong correlation between the presence of biotoxins in the brain and the inability to process that contrast, to actually see it. The visual processing centers in the brain aren't capable of doing it. And it's fairly accurate, actually. It's a good way, and it's an inexpensive or even free way to actually say, hey, look, I think there might be something going on here. And so that's that first step, and part of a big picture, of course. And from there, you can do a variety of things. You can say, well, let's find out what it is. So the way I think of biotoxins is there's direct and indirect ways to assess for them. So, directly, we know that you can measure mycotoxin in the urine. Like, you can use ELISA or mass spec to look for certain mold toxins. You can look for heavy metals. You can just do a blood draw and compare, like, is your level of mercury higher or lower than the 50th percentile that you find in the NHANES data.
And let me ask you, what tests do you like to do for biotoxins? And like the real time or Great Plains, you look at urine, and some people just like, everyone has, and it's like, when does that become significant in your mind, especially with symptoms? And then also with heavy metals, what type of testing do you like to do?
Yeah, so I've gone the circuit, honestly, in a lot of these tests. I tend to prefer using ELISA studies or antibody-based tests with real-time labs right now for mold toxin, because it captures all of the metabolites, whereas mass spectroscopy, like, you're only looking at a specific molecular weight, right? So you're only able to capture that toxin in its conjugated form. And so if glutathione, for example, is bound to ochratoxin or gliotoxin, you're not going to pick it up. So so the ELISA,
that's the problem. Stuff binds the stuff.
Yeah. So exactly. And so the ELISA I use from real-time labs, but if I'm looking at solvents, there's only a few labs that are doing this. US Biotech or Great Plains are both labs that I think are both good. I see great results on both, and those are mass spec tests, but they're looking at metabolites. So I think I think it's a better option, because you're not looking at the conjugated form, which gives us better data sets. So if we're looking, for petroleum distillates or herbicides, insecticides, plasticizers, PCBs, like you were saying, all that can be reflected on those urine tests. I still tend to recommend that people do a glutathione challenge for a week before those tests, taking 1,000 milligrams twice a day to mobilize all this toxin. And then I tend to have them stop it within 24 hours so that we're...
And just real quick, how do you like to give that?
I use liposomal glutathione. So, actually orally. I do an oral liposomal glutathione. If they're able to do a sauna, say for the night before they collect their urine, I think that helps to mobilize things out of fatty tissues, because that's really what we're talking about right now. And then, of course, in the mold toxin world, this has been a big topic, but you want to avoid foods that might have mold toxin in them for ideally a week before you do the test. If nothing else, at least 3 days.
The problem is it's some of the healthy foods, right?
Yeah, you talk about nuts and seeds or coffee or fruit, right? Like, a lot of fruit or berries or aged cheeses or wine or, any grain. Corn is notorious. All of these things are, they're siloed in the United States. They can be siloed for years at a time. And you get mold forming in the column of grain, and then it gets milled into flour. And now you got mold toxin mixed with all this, which may or may not affect things like, our gap junctions in our gut, but ultimately it's going to result in false positives, because you're going to be picking up things that are moving through your body.
Hey, it's thought to be the reason for, one of the plagues on Egypt and the firstborn dying from mycotoxins in the grain. So goes way back.
Yeah, everyone with even what was it, the French Revolution, or all those things like ergotamine in the grain supply. Everyone's hallucinating from mold.
Yeah, and you wonder, I don't know, I just wasn't planning to talk about it, but I'm wondering, are people's brains changed now and different? Are they more like, I think kind of fight or flight, basically polarized. Like, is that part of toxins? You know, stress plays a part, but I think toxins probably play a part too, you know?
Definitely they do. I mean, so again, like how toxins affect us, like we know they create these immune inflammatory reactions with, all of these innate driven cytokines like, IL-2 and interferon gamma and IL-6 and all the things we don't want to see. But in the central nervous system, which is mostly fat, you start creating activated microglia, these cells that once they get turned on, they're always screaming in panic. You start to see NMDA, like all of these toxins tend to have, what they call excitotoxins because they stimulate the NMDA receptors and drive, intracellular calcium buildups and things that actually do impair neurogenesis, impair oligodendrogenesis, and affect both our cognition as well as potentially, creating or setting people up for things like dementia or cognitive decline or worst case, neurologic autoimmune symptoms. So
it's that, glutamate and, basically cytotoxin, which is the side story is that I started stuttering so bad, right? I couldn't carry a cell phone because I couldn't say hello, And then I was going to go to actually one of the doctors I did a residency with and was on his team. He stuttered really bad, but he opened a stuttering center in Irvine. And then I read an article on aspartame and stuttering, and I stopped stuttering in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And then if all of a sudden I get, like, one time I changed from Starbucks to Coffee Bean and they didn't have, instead of sucralose, they had aspartame. I started stuttering again. I'm like, what's going on? But it's like Diet Coke too. It's like, I can't get off of it. It's like addictive. It's like, it's an excitotoxin, you get amped, but it causes stuttering. I mean, so talk about a neurotoxin, and that's mild compared to all this other stuff we're taking in.
Yeah, thankfully a water soluble thing that you stop it and within a few days, ideally it's clearing out of your system.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's a good example for sure.
And so, so how do you approach a patient? So I'm sure you get these patients that have been everywhere. Mm-hmm. They have this complex symptoms. They get transferred from doctor to doctor, even neurology, whatever. They come to you. How do you start? What do you do?
I take a really, really good history. That's the first part of it. I think that one of the worst problems we see in the medical system right now is
no one does that. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, managed care, right? Managed care has been it's great if you have a bladder infection, but if you've been suffering from chronic fatigue, I don't know how much someone's going to accomplish in 10 minutes. So,
if you're outside the box, they're great if you break your arm or if you're outside the box.
And that's what I say. I say, the way the medical model right now is great. It's set up for heroic medicine. Like if your life is in danger, by all means, I would, I'm appreciative that the medical model we have exists. But if, for the millions of people who are suffering from chronic conditions, there's a process of discovery. It's, as you said at the beginning of this, this talk, that it's a puzzle, and it is kind of gratifying to try and understand or unravel this whole puzzle. But so I'll start off with, usually an hour and a half to 2 hours with someone, which gives me enough time to hear their story, ask detailed questions on all of the different systems in their body, go back to when things started, try and understand the lineage, whether it was, maybe they were in a house, maybe they were traveling, maybe they got a tick bite, maybe they were, emotionally or abused or had some sort of, trauma to them. There's usually some sort of a trigger, and you start there. In the absence of that, what I tell people is let's throw out a big net, right? And, because there's usually some inner.
I like that term. I love getting lots of information.
Right.
And so you're not running down a lane that not there, you missed this over here,
Right.
And people are like, it's like we do so many tests that freaks out the phlebotomist at like Quest or whatever. And I remember I went myself, and they're like, "Oh, this is the doctor that orders all those tests." I'm like, "Yeah, I've heard he's like really cute."
Yeah, I will say it helps to have, we have a great lab in our office, and our lab director is, I mean, unparalleled in her ability to process, like, she comes with like a lot of tubes this big, like, this is what you want to order?
What, if I don't mind, I said, what labs do you use? What company?
Yeah, so it depends on what I'm looking for. So that wide net question that we sort of talked about a second ago. So if I'm always going to say it's some interplay between infections, immune dysfunction, and environmental medicine. So that's kind of the 3 points on the triangle, right? And so, on an infection level, depending on their history, I might do a really broad, like, antibody-based study, like we'd see from like Cyrex has got a great pathogen associated immune reactivity. It just tests for antibodies. Doesn't mean you actually have it, of course. And I think that's an interesting topic in of itself, because in medicine we all hear about these IgM and IgG antibodies, and okay, Ig means it's it's recent, and then you should get IgG. But in these intracellular infections, as you know, Kent, like, you see these IgM spikes that continue to happen. But at the same time, I've seen ILADS doctors, I've seen other Lyme doctors saying, well, at least for me, I'm initially treating IgM patients, and once they seroconvert to IgG, or if I get an initial patient that's IgG positive, I'm going to say, is this really an infection, or is this just an immune inflammatory response to the presence of this infection? Maybe you do an antimicrobial challenge, you do an antibiotic or a series of them, or maybe you do some herbal therapies. But if it doesn't make them better, or if it just makes them worse, like, you need to think that maybe the issue is really they've got this chronic immune driven inflammation. So again,
on the IgM, and so like infectious disease doctors, regular doctors, they say, okay, we've been taught from medical school, you get IgM antibodies and you get IgG. But a couple of things is that if you, like, with the immune system dysfunction you see in these conditions, so that Th1, Treg is low, and then Th2, Th17 is high, that you can't convert IgM antibodies to IgG.
yes.
And IgM antibodies are basically like, I think of them like a dog holding on to your pant leg, but IgG are more specific, and they activate complement and they explode the thing, And then all of a sudden you either treat the immune system or treat the infection. All of a sudden they switch to IgG. But they'll go to the infectious disease doctor, says, well, this is false positive because you've had these symptoms for a long time, and it's IgM. It's like, no.
And that's just it. And it's interesting because, again, we go through this, there's clues along the way, like you're saying, like, you can look for a split complement. You can look at C4a levels, and you see a number at 20,000, and it's exactly as you're saying, like, this is part of the reason why they're not seroconverting. Like, their bodies are constantly pushing this Th2 inflammatory reaction. They're not seroconverting. They're not getting an effective immune reaction. They're just generating a lot of smoke, right? It's
the body's trying.
Yeah.
It's effective. Yeah.
Hey, let me close this blind really quick. I'll do that. This thing is driving me nuts, Kent.
Hey, live TV.
Hey, there we go. I'm getting a lot of lines on my face. So anyway, so testing, so direct testing, I'll do, again, like, we can look at individual organisms, individual infections. I use IGeneX for a lot of that testing, but broad nets, things like Cyrex. For mold, I'll use urine mycotoxin with real time. For solvents, I tend to use Great Plains Lab. And for heavy metals, it's a whole topic, but I think a big part of the problem is people jump straight to doing challenge tests. They start doing EDTA, DMPS, things like that. Of course, you're going to be high. There is no reference range for someone after they DMPS. Everyone's high. So the way that I think is most the best integrity way of looking at heavy metals is just do a blood draw. Just measure your, blood mercury, blood lead. You can do urinary arsenic, and there's the federal.
But is that going to show just recent exposure?
So if they're having recent exposure, you're usually going to see really, really high levels, or you're going to see it in urine, right? Like you shouldn't ever see urine mercury or urine lead. Arsenic, definitely, you're going to see that no matter what. But other things you're going to.
Where does the arsenic come from?
Arsenic, well, it's in rice, it's in certain, like if you have chickens or livestock, I know you'll see it in some of those. It's a contaminant in well water for certain areas of the country. Like,
Is there anything you can eat? It's like, it's scary because it's like, all right, it gets up in the atmosphere and it rains, like even all these, basically biodynamic and, stuff. It rains on there,
there are things that would be helpful, and maybe it would be part of this like preventative, like you want to stay healthy, like humic and fulvic acid is a great way to bind stuff in the gut. Chlorella probably has some good binding ability. I mean, there are binders, but if you start getting into talking about like clay or charcoal or prescription cholestyramine or glucomannan or any of these other things, my concern long term is that you might be impacting your ability to
bunch of stuff,
nutrients.
And can you just mention the theory with the binders? Like,
sorry, what was that?
Mention the theory, like why you do binders.
Yeah, for sure. So again, like if we're talking about the chronic patient and we're looking at like toxins embedded in fatty tissue. Well, your body's always trying to move this stuff out, right? I mean, on some level, your body is trying to get it out. It's maybe not efficient. Maybe you don't have this HLA receptor recognition, but you're still going to mobilize things on some level. So anything that's fatty is going to ultimately end up in your bile and get eliminated through renal, excretion. Usually you see this hydroxylation followed by conjugation in the liver. And that comes out through bile, which of course is where most fat-soluble toxins go. That's going to get excreted into the small bowel, and ideally it's going to get eliminated with stool. But the problem with fatty things like fatty toxins is you get enterohepatic recirculation. So all of this gets reabsorbed back through the distal part of the small intestine, back into the bloodstream, back into the hepatic vein, where it gets redistributed back into the tissue. So again, it's just driving all this. So binders, like we're talking about, whether it's a natural binder like green clay or charcoal or a prescription like cholestyramine, it's designed to grab onto that bile and prevent those toxins from being reabsorbed back into the body so that you actually have a net loss, right? So things are moving out of you. So it's one of the reasons why, you're always going to take these binders an hour and a half before you eat. And in my patients, I'm always working to give them some cholagogue, something that's going to stimulate a bile release, right? And that could be something simple like a bitter, or you could use something stronger like that also has benefits, reparative benefits like phosphatidylcholine, or some lipotropic formula to really get
a nice drink with bitters.
What's that?
Make a nice drink with
yeah, exactly. Get a Manhattan, that's the best way to get your bile moving.
But it's scary. I mean, it should be everyone taking binders all the time,
Yeah. So
and when I eat sushi, I take, chelators with it, and I take Alinea, for parasites. And Dr. Stuppy, who's in LA, GI, did a little study on, what was the parasite? But on where all the parasites were, all the patients he had, and they were not in the low income areas, they were in the high income areas. And so we're trying to figure out why. I mean, my thought was, either cats or sushi, so.
Don't even get me started on cats, Kent. But it's funny because we call it the executive problem. You see the same thing with heavy metals, right? Like people who are not often in the most socioeconomically depressed area are buying more fish, eating more sushi, and predictably mercury levels are much higher than in many other.
It is. You can't eat anything.
I know. So you got to take your DMSA, and And like I was saying with heavy metals, like it's really not magic. There, you can Google the NHANES data, NHANES. It's the federal NHANES data. It's updated every 6 years typically.
Not our alternative quacky, stuff,
Not even alternative, not wacky. And if I remember right, the way, so it's all divided into percentiles. So you're at the 25th, the 50th, the 75th, 90th, or 95th percentile for mercury, lead, arsenic, cadmium, whatever. And if you're at the 75th percentile or higher, I think the terminology is it's likely that the heavy metal load in your body is contributing to some disease process. As soon as you reach the 90th percentile, that the terminology changes to say it's likely that the heavy metal level in your body is causing symptoms.
Well, and the problem is, though, they'll just adjust the reference range to be 95% of the people.
Well, that's just it.
Yeah, so now you're normal. It's like with testosterone, they keep lowering the range because people are lower now because of all the things,
Right.
It's nuts.
It's totally true. What is normal? And this also brings up the idea of like what
cancer is normal when you get older. Cardiovascular disease. Say, oh, you have cardiovascular disease, you're normal.
Yeah. Right. And it's and there's really sensitive people and people react individually, and you can't treat everyone like a cohort, right? And this brings us to the topic of like, well, how do you know if it's affecting you? So now you have high levels of mold or heavy metals. So that brings to the indirect testing, and that's all of the shoemaker markers. That's like looking at your MSH levels, your VIP levels, TGF beta 1. I love that test. I don't think people understand it very well, but.
And now what lab do you like to get that from?
So I bounce around, but MSH, VIP, I use LabCorp, TGF is LabCorp, C4A, we were using National Jewish Health out of Denver for that.
They screw it up like half the time at least.
Well, and actually in truth,
Quest screwing it up sending it, yeah.
Yeah, so Quest has told us they won't do pass-throughs anymore. We live in too small of an area, so we're not even able to do C4As now. We use a lot of LabCorp. We do VEGF and MMP9 through LabCorp. ADH and osmolality is Quest.
VEGF with Quest, it's 90% of the time. It's just they process it wrong.
Yeah,
and I don't want to be a downer with patients, but thinking, okay, labs are like, the gold standard. I sent our web guy just for basic labs. He did LabCorp, this is LabCorp Quest at the upper level. You walk downstairs, the labs right above each other, and walk down to the same test at Quest. One, he was diabetic. The other one, he had great insulin sensitivity. Like hemoglobin A1C was 6, the other one was 5.4. Insulin was 18 on one, and I think 8 on another. Like that's basic stuff.
Yeah.
And think about all these other tests,
I have seen so many botched tests. I mean, I could go off on someone who I had a simple UTI. It was pyelonephritis, but she had, they reported no bacteria, right, at all. And so I'm thinking, oh my God, this is
got a new tech looking, and yeah.
Yeah, and you know what I get as an answer is like, well, have you ever tried to look at an anthill under a microscope? It's all black. So if they have too many bacteria, you can't see it. I was like, oh my God. So, meanwhile, I'm ordering all these other tests, sending someone to urgent care when really they just needed to be treated with an antibiotic for an infection, actually. And it was.
See, but you have to be an expert in everything.
Right, exactly. But yeah, all those indirect markers are really helpful to understand. Okay, now you got the toxin, like how's it affecting you? A couple other markers I really like, HDG is, and don't ask me to tell you what the full name of that is, but you can do that test with doctor's data. It's a urinary test, and it's actually a marker of DNA damage. And
what was it again?
8-OH, like 8-hydroxy DG. And it's really, tends towards heavy metals and saying like, are the heavy metal levels actually affecting your DNA? But it can be used for a lot of things. Triglycine is a marker of impaired mitochondrial function that you see on the Great Plains solvents panel. And these are markers that you can see improve, right? So it's great. Similarly, we talked about all these
damage. Like, I mean, that's serious,
Yeah.
and it's not going to hurt you tomorrow, but 10 years down the road,
That's
you're
right.
going to have a lot of issues,
That's
so
right.
these people. And I always tell the doctors, I think our first job is to convince the patient they're in the right place. And how do you do that with, okay, these tests, like, I'd love to get all these tests, right? But a lot of times it's not cheap.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of the art, like, do you do some indirect tests? So, hey, there's something going on, which I kind of like to say, so now we need to dig deeper. Do you have a little kind of a strategy to how you, because it's rare the patient's going to go, okay, give me all these, 10 different panels from different labs. How do you approach that?
Yeah, so I guess there's two answers to that. One is, what can you get away with insurance, right? So all these Quest and LabCorp tests that we talked about, a lot of the times we can get insurance coverage for that. So that's hugely helpful. In a scenario where we're looking at out-of-pocket testing, hopefully a good history sort of helps to direct in that way. But ultimately, there's no easy answer, Ken.
It's a lot of gut, right? It's a lot of seeing a lot of patients.
It's just a lot of familiarity. I know that there's there is energetic testing, like ART, autonomic response testing, or kinesiology, or electrodermal testing. And I don't do that. There is a provider in my office who, in some cases, I'll send to him and say, hey, run up one of these energetic tests for me, and just give me your top 2 things that are hits. And that helps sometimes to hone things in for some people. But as I kind of alluded to earlier, like, these big nets, this idea of like, let's just do a general antibody study. Maybe we need to measure immunoglobulins to make sure they have enough of them to even, see a result that's quantifiable. But assuming that their humoral immune system is working, you can maybe do just general screenings for, like a chemical immune reactivity, which is a Cyrex test, or a mucosal immune reactivity. These are going to look at, solvents and some heavy metals and some infections. You combine it with a pathogen-associated immune reactivity test. You get this, you test for everything from strep to chlamydia. There's
checking not the antibodies, but the basic lymphocyte test to see their reactivity. So it's a different type of test.
It's just saying you've been exposed, right? It doesn't really mean anything more than that, but it does help to funnel things a little bit more. If I have my way, and ultimately I try and encourage patients to do as much as they can, because the more information you have when you start, the quicker you can get from point A to B. And honestly, a lot of the times, the less expensive it is, because you're not heading into tangents that you don't need to go down.
I know, but it's hard. It's like, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do the patient who's so sick. No, right. I don't do that. I don't do that. Like, I want to get the information, because there's likely, look, you've been to 22 doctors, right? They missed something. Let's look down some different paths. But it's tough. I mean, people are paying a lot. They have insurance, like, oh, it's not covered. Right. And that's what, the medical system is, it's tough. And these patients with these chronic multi-system illnesses are it's just a tough.
But Ken, even speaking to that, like, maybe, and maybe even to just leap into the topic of peptides a little here, like, we had this idea of like upstream versus downstream things, right? Like, we know that how things get affected. Sometimes it's helpful to just test for these upstream modulators. Like, if you test an MSH level in someone and it's not measurable, like it's less than 8 quantifiably, something is probably bound to that leptin receptor. Something is disrupting the melanocortin system, and you've already identified one thing. So this is where like melanotan comes in, and I don't think people really realize that melanotan is synthetic MSH, and you can use it, and it works great to like work on all these peripheral cytokines, work on reducing activated microglia in the brain, like preventing these NMDA receptor, constant stimulation. So there are simple ways, but
And just so you mentioned, like Melantan, instead of like the Barbie doll peptide, where you basically get tan, you lose weight, you lower inflammation,
Yeah.
and you increase libido. Like, hey, sign me up. But you do get pigmentation change. If you're young, I like it. But oh my God, I did it and I turned so dark. It's like, oh my gosh, what is this guy? But also, if you're older, you get some dark spots can come out, so it's not the best. But that whole system is something that I think is finally doctors are recognizing. It's so anti-inflammatory, mast cell activation,
Yep.
and I think inflammation is what's killing everyone. I mean, is one common pathway: inflammation, mitochondrial dysfunction, which all go together. And I think that's a great. So there's KPV, which is the tripeptide, is the piece of it which attaches to those receptors but doesn't cause the hyperpigmentation.
Yeah, and people I don't think it's really realized in that, as you mentioned, inflammation drives all of this, and melanotan and KPV have both been shown to have anti-inflammatory properties comparable to prednisone without any of the negative consequences of using a systemic corticosteroid. So, wow, right? Like, isn't that a huge deal? And similarly, BPC, so you start thinking of like inflammatory bowel diseases or rheumatoid arthritis or other things that really, or ankylosing spondylitis, all these things that people are on chronic steroid therapy. This is such a better option for so many of these folks.
Yeah, and even if they're on steroids, you give it counteracts it,
There you go.
And it's like, you reduce the inflammation, but actually anabolic rather than catabolic. And so what are your favorite peptides, or what are typically the order you use them? I understand there's gonna be variation, like what tests come up, and but what in general are your go-to peptides?
So I guess what I'd start off by saying is, like, I categorize peptides in terms of like what they do. So the way I deal with any biotoxin illness is, like, I kind of have this 7R program in my head that I think of, which the first one's always removing or detoxifying the substance, right? Like,
get out of that environment or whatever it may be.
Yeah, get it out of the body, okay? Whether you got to kill something or help, excrete toxin. Then we have replenishing upstream neuroregulatory hormones, then reducing inflammation, then rebalancing the immune system, restoring endocrine function, repairing mitochondrial function, and then finally rehabilitating impaired neurologic function. And the reason I'm telling you that is because I start in that top-down approach, okay? So as we talk about the second thing after removing the substance, replenishing neuroregulatory hormones. So we already talked about melanotan. I love the stuff. I use it a lot in a lot of patients, and I find it's incredible. VIP.
Do you have problems with people getting dark spots or?
Yes. Yeah, I do actually. And so the way I tend to use melanotan is I tend to kind of think of it as a priming the pump, where I'll use higher doses for roughly, sometimes 6 to 8 weeks, which is the life cycle of a T cell, right? So we're trying to actually impact that immune inflammatory response. And then I'll reduce the dosage, frequency, or amount pretty significantly, because by that point, as you're seeing melanocyte deposition, you're seeing dark spots, you're seeing all of this stuff happening. And that's helpful to sort of modulate it. KPV, as you talked about, won't do that. Unfortunately, as soon as I had wanted to start using it, regulatory bodies that we shan't speak of sort of like pulled that off the ability to
Hey,
use.
we're bringing it back. We should have it in a month, I hope.
Yeah, well, I'll be all over you on that one, because I'm excited, because theoretically KPV, as you mentioned, has some of the same benefits of using melanotan, from its ability to reduce all of the inflammation in the body, cutting down.
It's more potent.
Is it? Okay, I didn't even know that. Yeah, so that's something I didn't know. But people don't realize these MSH, or the terminal fragment with KPV, it upregulates IL-10 and it induces CD4 and CD25 markers on Treg cells. So it improves antigenic tolerance. The presence, of these things, in models of RA and inflammatory bowel disease, ARDS.
I think it's going to be huge. And they even have, psoriasis. You rub it on, hour later it's gone. And when my girlfriend was getting the dermatographia, rub it on, like 10 minutes later it's gone.
Thanks for joining us on the Peptides and Longevity podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps us reach more listeners passionate about optimizing their health. For more insights, resources, and updates, visit our website at www.holtorfmed.com. Together, let's embrace a future of health and vitality. Until next time, stay inspired and keep thriving.